The important thing is, and you've kind of stressed this, is like try not to get overwhelmed by it, and try not to like lose hope because I think there is going to be opportunity for creativity in all of this, and it could be really interesting to see how some of these things could solve for some of the really crappy stuff that happens today.
Let's go. All right. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Pubcast. I'm your host, John Loomer. So, historically, we've used this time to talk about Facebook ads and how, what the latest changes are that impact us as advanced Facebook advertisers. But as we know, there are some big things happening right now in the space of AI that impacts all of us. And as a result, that's going to be our topic once again today. Uh, Luke Elliott is joining us again today. Luke's a member of the team.
Howdy, howdy.
Um, yeah. So how you doing, Luke?
Sorry, I had my little mute button on. I'm doing good. Apparently learning my microphone setup. I don't know. It looks like it's not quite as sharp as yours.
Yeah. So you might have to help me out on explanation, but Luke's more of a data nerd. I like to say that. Actually, I've never said this before. I'm going to say it for the first time. I play a data nerd on TV, but Luke actually is one in real life. Because I often go to Luke with any of the data nerd stuff that I need help with. But
That's
how do
fair.
you is there a better way to explain your experience and knowledge and expertise on that?
Yeah, I suppose somewhere along that spectrum, I'm far enough to also like know all the stuff that I don't know and realize that there's a ton out in the world. But yeah, I've got a history of working in digital analytics, in particular advertising analytics. Spent a lot of time actually running ads, like you, John, and kind of exist at that nexus of data and advertising and messaging and technology, which is why I love to talk about AI because I think it's super relevant and super important to not only what we are doing today, but the world in general. So I'm glad you're continuing to put this focus here because I think it's pretty daggone important.
Glug, glug, glug.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can't ignore it. Honestly, if you do ignore it, you're probably going to be in trouble. And honestly, the latest announcements, I don't even know where to start with except to explain what happened, and I'll kind of allow you to do that because I feel like there's so many potential results of a future of search that's powered by AI that could change everything. But we've got Bing and Google, which their product called Bard. I mean, what can you tell us about that, Luke?
I'll tell you, I'll try to not go too over the top of everybody, but essentially, I think that the biggest thing that's important to know as like a general consumer of this stuff is the competitive space in the search landscape is really heating up, and it's heating up very quickly in ways that I think have surprised a lot of folks who work in this space. And there are general implications, especially for SEO and folks who especially have sites devoted to different types of content, like yourself. And I'm sure you're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
But I think the big thing to sort of be aware of is that so ChatGPT is the big thing everybody's been talking about. Of course, we've talked about it in the past couple podcasts. That's owned by a company called OpenAI, and OpenAI is heavily backed by Microsoft. Microsoft owns Bing and is imminently going to launch a version of Bing that has ChatGPT functionality connected to it. And so that's important because the way that the search interface will function is sort of in a lot more connected to if you've used a lot of if you use Google and you ask it questions, because by the way, Google still has north of 90% market share worldwide in terms of search market share. But that's something we're going to watch, of course. But
Mm.
if you've ever asked Google a question, you might be familiar with how sometimes Google will just give you the answer and not necessarily direct you to a website. Now, you could still get to information about maybe where that's sourced in some cases, depending on sort of the question you're asking. And so imagine that sort of functionality really blown out and much larger than it is today. and much more of a sort of long form answer in some cases, instead of just these like little short single liners, or just saying here's the
Right.
snippet,
Right.
from a site that does that. And so that's important because Microsoft's launching of that is heavily influencing Google, and how they're going to be launching what's called Bard. And if I explain it correctly, hopefully, Bard sits on top of a underlying AI system called Lambda, and
Hmm.
Google's, of course, the parent of all of that. And so these two behemoths essentially are fighting back and forth, and there is a lot riding on this for both companies. So I think we've also seen some interesting examples, and you and I have kind of had some brief conversations about this, about how it looks like there's clearly a lot of internal pressure, especially on Google's side, and it's even
Hmm.
one of the big headlines this week. And of course, you can talk about it, it's sort of a little bit of a gaffe, with Google doing a little bit of a preview video, or I think they called it a demo of
Hmm.
Bard. And there was this question about like James Webb Space Telescope, JWST, which by the way, I'm in love with that thing. This is the back of my phone. That's
Nice.
the little refracting mirror setup on the JWST. But the folks who were paying attention realized that one of the answers that was given in response to this question about JWST was actually wrong. And
Hmm.
one of the and of course, like that's happening, and that's happening with ChatGPT too. But I think that the reason that I mentioned that, and that it's important in the context of the pressure these companies are feeling, is it seems like that would only happen in an environment where Google executives are like, we got to just get this message out, and because you'd think something like a really big important message like that was probably double, triple, quadruple checked under normal circumstances, and it might have been here too, and someone could have just missed it. We're all human, but there was a pretty significant impact attributed to this activity that was on the stock price.
Hmm.
Which those I always take those with a grain of salt too, because there's a lot of things if you look at. But it was interesting because essentially Google lost a whole lot of stock price
Yeah.
equivalent, and then Microsoft went up at the same time. So people were kind of saying, oh, is it the end? Of course, whatever. But the reason that I even mentioned that is, aside from the big splashy headlines, is just it seems like there's a ton of competitive pressure really going on. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. That was probably
Yeah.
way more than you were asking.
Oh
Sorry.
man. Like I had a point and then I had another
No,
point
I'm
and then
sorry.
another
I'm
point.
sorry. I just
No,
kept
that's
talking. I got
oh,
too into it. Go
we're both the
ahead.
same way, so throw us in the same room. But no, I think a few things here. In terms of the accuracy, the good thing to me, like yes, it's a gaff, but it's also reality, right? So um we had Rachel Woods on a few weeks ago, and she's kind of like our AI expert that we go to. She had a video, a few videos today, as she's had hands on now with at least the new Bing, if not Bard, but I didn't think Bard was out. But her impression was these new search engines are more factual than the original ChatGPT, which had lots of issues. But still, like, I mean, she just randomly said like 90% factual, which is still not airtight by any means. But so that's also just one thing that we have to understand going in, that you just can't trust everything it spits out as being true, even as it's getting better, which it's going to get better. Um, and I think no matter how airtight it is, people are going to dispute certain facts as we know today. Um, so that's one thing, but you're absolutely right about another in terms of trends, right? Google has been going in this direction of zero click search for a while based on rich
Wait, is
snippets,
that your
which
phrase? Is that your phrase?
somebody else, no,
Oh,
somebody
I
else
was
has
like, I
finished.
like that. I hadn't heard that yet. No.
I'm not
Okay.
even sure where I heard it,
Yeah, I
but
like that. Yeah.
I just remember that really got my attention when they said it, and it freaked me out because it is kind of freaky. Um, so whoever said that, my apologies. But we've been in this environment for a while, and honestly, I had been, I've been kind of uncertain about using rich snippets on my website because of the implications of, oh, great, we're going to feed all this information to Google and not get anyone going to our websites. Why the hell would I do that? Um, and I guess what I an easy example with the current Google is I do this all the time. How old is X celebrity? Right. And you're going to get a very quick answer. Don't have to click on anything to go find out, what that source is from or whatnot. Now, imagine that, but in something much more complicated, you're just going to get answers. Now, Rachel had a demo video of Bing where so you put in this usually kind of complex question, you get this complex answer that's in conversational tone, but like where sources are necessary, which was good, they linked the words of the answer that would, at least the way that I interpreted it, that would go to the source. Certainly good. We don't know how much people are actually going to click that. Maybe they want some more context, so that would certainly be good. But it still makes me super nervous as someone whose website and business has benefited from and ultimately really relied upon organic, we'll say Google, because that's what it's been, Google referrals for years. Now, I actually dug this up the other day. It's more than 11 million sessions, resulting in more than 15, I think more than 17 million page views that came from Google search referrals
This is on your site,
on,
johnloomer.com.
on my website. Now, the other thing is, and these things are not disconnected, in the fact that I'm not seeing the same results these days. Is I'm not getting the same referral traffic from Google either, which could be partly due to the rich snippets and just the way people consume content generally, and just I honestly I haven't seen numbers on search referrals, like how much that has changed over the years, if that has changed, but I'd be curious about that. So anyway, we're heading in that direction anyway, but it freaks me out because I'm still at a good place. Like I think most people would call me a whiner that I'm only getting 1,000 plus referrals per day from Google, but that's a fraction of what it used to be. What if that ends up being 100 or nothing as a result of this? That obviously is a big deal. So but the thing is, we really don't know where this is going. It's just a matter of kind of what we project at this point. Cheers.
Right. And but I think it's you're making a really important point that you just I mean you should be thinking about this, right? So like we do have to think about the future of what content really even means and how it's consumed, which I mean you've already been making changes to kind of address some of those changes in behavior anyway, like all of your short form video focus and there are obviously a lot of factors that are influencing the way that content's consumed, whether it's short attention spans or, but a lot of it's of course, content delivery algorithms, and when people express interest in certain types of content, if your content's associated with that, you can be served up that within social media anyway, and that I do kind of think about parallels as much as possible in this stuff. So like I was talking to somebody at lunch today about this actually. So like I do genuinely think this is going to be as general usage of AI and general involvement of AI in all of our lives is going to be as important as the invention of the internet.
Mm,
And I was trying to think about like if it was more of a parallel to like when social media came out, but I think it's actually when the internet came out. It's going to
I
be
agree.
that revolutionary. But the reason that I even think about like the social media launch is when social media sort of first came out, specifically Facebook and Twitter, it was all, of course, just a um, chronological, right? So it wasn't about like what type of content, what you're interested in. Then that's when everything sort of changed, and you probably remember people doing protests about don't
Oh
change
yeah.
my news feed, don't let me follow what I want to follow, all this kind of stuff.
Every single news feed changed, and there were a lot of them.
Yeah.
Bring
Well, they
back the
used to
old
tell us
news
when they were going to
feed.
do them.
Bring back the
Yeah.
old Facebook. Like we don't really hear about old Facebook anymore, which is kind of funny. Yeah.
Right. the what I think about in terms of parallels there is like that behavioral change that had to happen for site content. Like site content, in order for it to still be discovered, it wasn't really necessary. I mean, search was still a part of it, but what people were starting to do, and that we've had bad stuff happen because of this, it was all about, the clickbaity headlines, right? And that was like how you get people
Hmm.
to attract to your site. And then the clickbaity stuff got rewarded in the content because it was getting the most interaction. And then of course Facebook did all these changes to try to stop that as much as possible. But I'm been thinking about parallels to that, like to how let's say search is no longer the way it is. I think it just even makes it more important of what's your content play in those other
Yeah,
spaces, because so much of it's going to be about, okay, you're still having that initial interest. And so let's say in your case, a short form video talking about topic X, Y, or Z. And then that's where you say at the end of the video, on my site, I've got an article about blah, blah, blah. Click here to view it. And that can still be the way that you get search traffic. I'm sorry, web traffic,
right.
without sort of relying on search. That's sort of one piece of it. The other piece, which I'm going to leave for us to talk about maybe later today, is more about like the credit piece that comes to when you're feeding sort of what
Right.
these search engines are feeding forward. But I'm just curious as to your thoughts of like what's on your mind in terms of content generation, and like, do you think that this means you will lean more into certain things? Are you not even really there yet? Are you kind of waiting to see how stuff will change? I'd like to hear where your mind is on that.
Well, I think it's important, first of all, to be aware, but not necessarily make any drastic moves, and just move all into, okay, I'm just going to abandon my website now, which would seem silly. Because as of right now, my referral traffic has been up compared to last year. So I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing for now and kind of watch those numbers. I think that's important to watch, see what's going on. But I'm also doing what I'm doing in terms of going where they're at, right? So doing this more than I've done in the past. This has always been kind of a marketing rule anyway, but it's become more important to, go to TikTok, go to Facebook and Instagram Reels, you know, podcasting, wherever you got to go. And I guess I would say this is kind of a new rule, to be honest with you, because it used to be find your platform and go there. I'm starting to feel more and more. It's like you maybe diversify a little bit more than you used to, because LinkedIn I think is important as well. So that's the first thing. Is like, yeah, I think it's really important to if I can't necessarily depend upon long term traffic getting sent to me organically, then I need to go where the audience is at. And it's probably going to put more of an emphasis on ads as well, assuming those ads can actually be used for driving traffic, um, and to that impact. Because ultimately, I really wonder about the long term prospects of the typical business updating regularly a website and like whether it's going to continue to make sense.
Right. And when you say ads in that context, you mean social ads?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And that
Not search ads, I guess, because I don't know what
right.
that's going to look like. 'Cause-
Well,
and honestly, that is
yeah.
the other thing I want to talk about. Unless you had something
Sure.
you want to mention real
No, no,
quick.
no. I mean, I'm sure we'll jump around. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, this whole thing kind of makes my brain hurt a little bit because, so on one hand, yes, it's better for the user if you ask a question or a series of questions and you get the answers in this conversational tone, and they never leave Bard or Bing or whatever. That's better for the user. Ultimately, that's not necessarily better for Bing or Google though either, because how are they going to monetize those things? Typically it's been with those links, that go to our websites, because, organic does well. So you've got motivation, and then pay to put your links at the top. And if people are just ignoring those links, what are they going to do? So that was one thing. And it doesn't mean that they have to, like, they'll find another way. I don't know what it's going to be. But that also takes me though to like what I was saying is like, if all of a sudden we're not getting any organic referral, to our website. I'll just say for my own. If all of a sudden that disappears and I'm just getting a trickle of traffic, what's going to motivate me to update on a regular basis? Because right now there's been lots of motivation because I know the more I create and establish my authority, people are going to find me, and primarily because of Google. So if that's no longer going to happen, why should I keep updating my website? I can establish my authority just by doing the videos and stuff. But if I stop updating my website, that's also the data that feeds the AI to answer these questions. I mean, doesn't this feel like some sort of endless cycle that could create problems?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's also like there are other angles of that. I mean, you could argue, and maybe this is kind of what you're getting at too. It actually can hurt the engines in some cases because, like, especially if you think of, well, not the engine, but the parent company. So Google, for example, having their own display network that's
Mm-hmm.
based on all of these different sites getting traffic. The thing is, Google might say, well, we'd actually just prefer to just have it on our on Google anyway. But that's almost like you're going to be taking from one hand to do that.
Cheers.
At the same time, what I'm really curious about, like in your example, the number one search for that drives a lot of your traffic, I imagine, or top five is going to include John Loomer, because people are looking for you, and then they're getting your site served up in search results, and so then they're clicking it, and so they might not know your URL, so that's like just what they're looking for, right? And so, like in an example like that, is like businesses like yours where it's really based on the name of your service essentially is going to still be really important and then in terms of actually getting traffic. But would there be a scenario where someone is asking, well, what does John Loomer think about this topic? If the AI has access to your site's content, would it just serve them the answer without actually taking them to your site? And I don't know. Like I haven't had, of course, like access to these things to test that, but I'm really curious about that because if it does, I think it's a very different type of argument
Mm-hmm.
that really leans into where attribution and giving credit to source is like critically important. And then in that case, we're not talking about just credit. I mean, really, the credit you need is the site traffic. Like it shouldn't be able to just scrape everything. And I think that this sort of, yeah, you look like you have thoughts. So I'm going to
Yeah.
stop because I'll go off on a whole other tangent if I don't stop. So yeah, what you thinking?
Well, once you said that, that's something I'd never really thought of before. Is a situation where it's like someone puts in, what does John Loomer think about X? And on one hand, sure, I want that traffic. But on the other hand, it can only give an answer if I update my website with what I think about X, right? And I want Google or Bing, whatever, to provide an answer regarding what I think about that. So even if it doesn't drive the traffic, I don't want just to say I don't know who John Loomer is and he hasn't said, what he thinks about this. I want them to be able to say something. Um, so that's honestly a way that I have not looked at the potential value of zero click searches in the past, and reason to keep updating the site would be for that reason.
Yeah. I think you're going to get a big range of opinions from site owners on their preferences for that. But it's sort of like even when we think about the short form video you've been doing, like a lot of that's about bringing the content as close as possible to where it can be consumed as easily and quickly as possible and efficiently as possible, right? And I think there's an argument to be made that this stuff could actually help. If this site, or sorry, if this service, AI, whatever it may be, is more able to efficiently get someone the answer from your site than if they were searching directly on your site using sort of, I'll call it traditional search techniques, you could argue maybe that actually could help you, you know? And in some cases, like what I've seen is, especially for more of these like niche topics that are maybe a bit more specialized, I could do a very general search about something related to Facebook ads. And or it could do a very specific one. And in both of those cases, and in many scenarios, I'm going to honestly have to sift through a lot of junk. And it sort of is dependent on the quality of my search and also the quality of the content that's out there. There is a possibility that higher quality content that's better organized in a way that AI could sort through more efficiently could actually help certain types of content producers depending on how it comes to life. I think it's all going to be a balance, right? Of like, what does that look like in terms of someone like you saying, I'm okay with this being more zero click, because then they're going to see I'm the authority on this. I've got the
Hmm.
information they're looking for. The question becomes, how often are they going to know that was John Loomer and not somebody else
Right.
or some aggregation of different things? And we don't know that yet, based on sort of what's been publicly available anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like some stuff is just starting to click for me. So, like, I also compare it to if you're an expert in some field and you're interviewed by CNN or the Times or something like that. Even if they don't say, hey, go to johnloomer.com, saying expert in this field, John Loomer said X helps your brand. Or kind of for the same reasons that, I'm creating videos on TikTok and Reels and everything else and not trying to drive traffic. I feel like I'm creating content for those sites just like my content on my site creates content for that search engine potentially if it doesn't even if it doesn't drive traffic, which could still be mutually beneficial as long as my name is mentioned at least.
Attribution. Yeah.
Yeah, the attribution, even if it doesn't include a link. I'm not saying I don't want the link, I want it, but
Right.
if we're realistic and we don't think people are going to typically click on them, then who cares whether there's a link or not? um so suddenly it's starting to come together a little bit more for me why, if it works that way. And I mean, I feel like there are a million ideas swimming my, like, imagine this: if this AI, the data it's fed isn't just like our websites, but, and this might be happening anyway, but like every podcast I've done, either I've hosted or shows I've been on, and it can index all the John Loomer quotes, things I said, all the videos that I did on TikTok and elsewhere, and all my blog posts, and then ask, what does John Loomer think about this, and to easily be able to respond to that, especially with recency being important. I mean, that sounds pretty amazing to me.
Yeah, and then you can just say, "What did I say about that?" in case you forget.
Oh, right. Absolutely could. Yeah. Cheers. I don't know. I feel like I'm going on a weird, you know, different world where I don't even know if any of that's possible, but it sounds like something that AI could do.
Well, I mean, anything that's in text form currently, I think the limitations are just like, especially for podcast content, if it's been transcribed into a form that's indexable or searchable by that engine essentially. But and that's a little bit of a segue into something that I've been thinking about in terms of um, this kind of content indexing piece, because as it stands today, um, and this is I don't think this is too nerdy. It's like,
It's okay.
but I mean, so you've got a site, right? And you basically can tell Google what to index or not based on some different things you can put. It's usually in your bots.txt file, whatever, or some other index tagging. So you can kind of already control what you're giving Google access to. And in theory, you should be able to also do that for what you're giving some of these database systems that are driving these AI systems to give them permission, to what they can use. Now, I think we're kind of in this gray area right now, and this is definitely happening in the visual art stuff, is whether people have
Yeah.
said you have my permission to use this or not, right?
Right.
So I think one of the big ones was like Midjourney and accessing stuff from some different art websites. And so at some point, and I think we talked about this in our very first conversation about it, I do wonder if there is a model that looks at sort of like what a display ad network looks like right now, where if you give it permission to have a placement, whatever, however many pixels by however many pixels on your site, every time you get an ad served, you're going to get some, tiny, tiny fraction of a cent at credit for that. Could there also be a model where if you are opting into the database, there's ad dollars that are kind of sitting on top of that when, let's say it's Google, right? And then you say, Google, yes, you can use my stuff for Bard or Lambda. That's feeding it, and I want some credit, right? And so
Mhm.
then what they do is they create some sort of a model to where, depending on how often your content's referenced and how much of it and how significantly it drives different responses and how much traffic is actually extracting those responses, you could maybe get some ad dollars for that. And I wonder if these organizations are already planning that. I have not seen anything that would indicate that, but I've just been still thinking about like, and this is all the way going back to a point you made about 15 minutes ago about how like what's your incentive to keep creating content, right? Like
Mhm.
why would you keep doing that if it's just you never get anything for it? I mean, some people are just going to want to share their opinions and thoughts and ideas, and they're really excited and interested, and some people have businesses and some people are somewhere between those two, right?
Right.
So it's like, how would you make that work? And that's one model. I don't think it's necessarily the only one, but it's like one that I was thinking about, some parallels to the way some of that stuff exists today that could be possible. So first question I'll ask you is, does that model make sense? And
Yeah.
then if so, would you be willing to kind of participate in it in that way?
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to be open-minded about anything right now. Um, I think so whether or not this means we'll participate in this way and create content on on the website that will be used. I also wonder if generally, like if we end up with this cycle where less website content is created, couldn't they just lean heavily on social media content at that point?
Well, the way it stands today, is the social media channels have it pretty locked down in a lot of
Hmm.
cases. It's not especially Facebook. After especially after all the, does anybody remember Cambridge Analytica? And then
Yeah.
all the stuff that happened. But it's interesting because like Twitter's not like that necessarily. Like you can still potentially get access to what they call the fire hose, which is all content posted. And so, yeah, I mean, you could theoretically have an environment that where all of that stuff is feeding in. And I feel like we've even seen some of these
And maybe
little,
we opt into that, right? As creators, right? Kind of like what you're saying. It's like,
exactly.
I'm going to give you all of my social media accounts. I'm going to give you my link to my podcast, YouTube, whatever, our website. That's where I was kind of going with how powerful that could be. Where like, what does John think about X? And not only have a quote, but be able to immediately pull the video snippet or audio snippet from the podcast that could then lead you to those things and participate in those more often.
Yeah, because sometimes people ask you questions and the answer might be spread across 5 articles,
Right.
and then it's like, depending on what they're asking too, because a lot of times we have to kind of make a guess. 'Cause especially if folks don't really understand the full context. I remember this happened big time when all the changes related to iOS 14 were rolling out, right? Like people would ask this one very specific question, and then you're like, "Oh, have you configured your prioritized events? Have
Mhm.
you
Right.
verified your domain? Have you shared, all these different things?" And that's like a scenario that I think this kind of stuff could be really valuable. And I've seen ChatGPT kind of do that. ChatGPT almost seems to have a little bit of a bias towards not assuming directly that it understands the full context. So it will sometimes say, "Here's what you could be asking about, and if that's so, then here's what." And it's like, so the systems sort of lend themselves to that sort of a framework anyway. And then if you combine that with somebody like you who has, I mean, how many articles do you have on your site now?
So it's over 1100.
Yeah, I mean, there's and
Yeah.
there's so much stuff in all of those that the way it works today is it's pretty reliant on people finding people having a good Google search to, link to whatever. And I know you do different things to prioritize content for certain topics and all that kind of stuff. But a system like this, it almost makes some of that like less important, and it's like it's kind of interesting because in theory, if you were depending on the way your site is structured, you could even kind of have like a stream of consciousness about a bunch of different things. And it doesn't necessarily have to be really well organized because the AI is going to do that for you. And then you could even like, I'm sure that we're going to see products coming out where that's exactly what the product is intended to do. So you say, here's my stream of consciousness. Can you help me organize a website around this stuff? And then it would do that. So like there are a lot of implications when it comes to just content. I know I'm kind of getting off the topic of attribution.
Cheers.
The way SEO kind of works right now is you have to decide, am I going to be like, am I going to make a lot of content for this really large topic that a whole lot of people are talking about, that it's really popular, it gets tons of searches, but it's really competitive, and maybe I won't really get indexed for that, so maybe it doesn't work, whatever. And then you've got like the other end of the spectrum, which is like, I have this really one specific thing I'm going to talk about, and this is my niche. And I know it's not high volume necessarily, but I really can make great content that's specifically related to that. So I know I'll rank well. And I think what could be really interesting about if some of these systems come out and start doing some of this stuff the way they could, it could actually flop that model on its head a little bit, because the really broad stuff, people are going to be like, well, I'm not going to write about that anymore because there's already a ton of content and it may never use mine. And then depending on how this attribution works, maybe it uses just one word or a phrase from my site combined with 8,000 other sites. Whereas if I go really niche and specific, what could happen is, again, if it depending on if these systems will use just one site's content or not, or what it would do is say, we don't have a good answer, but here's a site that seems like it talks about that, click here,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. You could actually see a model where some of that starts to push towards specialization instead of generalization, which is, I mean, it's always been a back and forth in SEO anyway, but I do wonder what that would do for the overall content realm and ecosystem.
I don't know. I'm honestly curious what SEOs are thinking, period, right now, beyond just being scared and defensive. Uh, because it's like there's so much unknown. I think that's the main thing. We just don't know what this is going to result in. So, what is SEO 6 months from now or a year from now? I don't know if anyone can really even answer that.
Well, the thing about the field, I think, is they've like folks who are really into it have always been had to adapt over time, because like
Yeah.
even in the beginning, and you still got this concept of black hat SEO, which is like doing stuff that you're not supposed to. But in the beginning, even before we had these ideas of real rules, it was just, okay, cram a ton of words that are onto
Yeah.
this site, as many as possible, right? And then it was like that way you'll get ranked, and you. Then of course we started having all these quality signals and all that stuff. But I think so I think my point there is that I think these folks have already had to know that the tomorrow's never really necessarily guaranteed to be the same as before. That said, I think this is a huge disruption,
Yeah.
potentially, and potentially the largest that will ever have been faced by the industry. So yeah, but I think like that's going to be in a lot of industries
Oh
with
yeah.
this AI stuff, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective. The important thing is, I think, and you've kind of stressed this, is like try not to get overwhelmed by it, and try not to like
It's really
lose
overwhelming.
hope, because I think there is going to be opportunity for creativity in all of this, and it could be really interesting to see how some of these things could solve for some of the really crappy stuff that happens today. At the same time, I mean, there's always a dark side and a bright side to
Right.
it.
Yeah. I think the difficulty about where we're at right now, where it's just the very beginning of something big, but we don't really know where it's going, is projecting where it's going, because we always use the context of what's happened in the past to try to frame how we think things are going to go in the future. So we envision a world where there are still link clicks and driving traffic to our websites, and that Google and Bing are going to monetize based on those clicks and display ads and things like that. There could be something completely different that we haven't even thought of. But the main thing is we just have to be paying attention. I mean, anyone who's paying attention right now is ahead of 95% of the people out there. Um, Most of us aren't experts in this. So just kind of having an idea what's going on, you'll be ahead of everybody else.
Well, and I think, I mean, like you just said, most people aren't experts, and there's an opportunity to jump on this now and like try to develop your skills as much as possible. Sort of like I think folks did in the early days of Facebook, like yourself, kind of like say, I'm willing to jump in, I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to test, and that already put you ahead of a lot of folks just because they were intimidated by it or they think it's a fad or whatever. I mean, I can tell you this AI stuff's not a fad. It's very clear to me that you know, this is not going to go away tomorrow.
Are people going to say that AI is going to go the way of MySpace? That's what everybody said about Facebook
That's
for a
right.
decade. Like, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, right.
bottoms up.
So I really like MIT Technology Review. It's a nice publication. If just a general recommendation, they just have really interesting content. But they did have an article, and it was titled "ChatGPT is everywhere. Here's where it came from." And I thought it was just kind of an interesting perspective because they broke it down into pretty simple terms of like the what led to how we got to ChatGPT and sort of the timeline stuff. And so I'll just kind of quickly take you through it.
Yeah.
So it says in the 80s and 90s, we had something called recurrent neural networks. And by the way, I'm completely paraphrasing everything here. So you can go read the article if you want to see in detail. But essentially, it was about kind of these language models that are trained on lots of text and the way that it's kind of like trying to think like inspired by the way brains work. And that they were invented in the 80s. They could handle sequences of words, but they were slow to train. They would forget words in a sequence. And it kind of was just trying to improve upon that. And then in 1997, there says, and I'm going to completely mispronounce their names, but it says computer scientists Sepp Hochreiter and Jürgen Schmidhuber
Hmm.
fixed this by inventing LSTM, which is long short-term memory networks, and it allowed past data that was in an input sequence to be retained for longer, and it could also handle strings of text that were much longer, several hundred words long. But the limitation that was at that time was language skills were limited. So that was 1997. So we had sort of 80s to 97. Then nothing is on their timeline, which I'm sure lots was happening, and this has
Hmm.
really frustrated a lot of computer scientists until 2017. So that's a 20-year span, right? And then it talks about this breakthrough, which actually came from a team of Google researchers, where they invented something called transformers, which is a kind of neural network that can track where each word or phrase appears in a sentence. And so they give an example. It says, hot dog means very different things in the sentences. Hot dogs should be given plenty of water
Hmm.
and hot dogs should be eaten with mustard, which I really appreciated that because I've done a lot of work in social listening, and like that is exactly like that gives me nightmares because anytime you have something that is used in multiple
Yeah.
instances like that, you have to use all these really manual methods to clean it up. But AI is making obviously a lot of that easier now. And then it goes to 2018 and 2019, where we had GPT and GPT-2. So I think the big thing to notice there is there's only 1 year difference between
Hmm.
those two. First two language models came just a few months apart. And so then that was kind of this new thing about GPT. It said that like the innovation was it combined transformers. So a transformers, again, about that kind of contextual language thing with on unsupervised learning. We talked about unsupervised learning a little bit when we were talking to Rachel, but the way they explain it here is it's a way to train a machine learning model, in this case on lots and lots of text that hasn't been annotated beforehand. So it lets the software figure out patterns in the data by itself without having to be told what it's looking at. So that's why it's also like when we talk about how much data GPT-3 was trained on, it's because it's like able to kind of do some of this itself without humans necessarily being having to be in there. So then this was just 2018, 2019. Then we're in 2020. And then we had GPT-3, and their thing said GPT-3 made jaws drop.
Hmm.
It was had ability to generate human-like text, and that was kind of the first time it could do this. It could answer questions, summarize documents, generate stories in different styles, translate between English, French, Spanish, Japanese, and more. Sound familiar, right? That's kind of exactly what GP when we think of Chat GPT, because remember again, Chat GPT is run on top of
Hmm.
GPT-3. And then it gave a stat here, which I thought was pretty interesting. So it says GPT-3 has 175 billion parameters, and those are parameters are the values in a network that are adjusted during training. So it's 175 billion. GPT-2 had 1.5.
Hmm.
So it was kind of illustrating why it was so much more of an advancement. Again, that was just, we're talking 2020 versus 2019. So then it kind of goes forward into how we got from 2020 to now, and it was talking. By the way, they also highlight a lot of issues which it with the original GPT-3 about biases and how it was trained on the internet, and the internet is kind of a toxic place. So
Yeah.
it had a lot of that toxicity, and that was what a lot of what they were trying to kind of clean out until we got, forward. There was some stuff in 2022, early 2022, a couple of other models, and we get to this thing in December 2022 for ChatGPT. And the reason that I wanted to bring all of that up was to kind of highlight how quickly this has begun moving in very recent years.
Hmm.
And because I think one of the things I keep running into with everybody is like, people are like, yeah, but it's not perfect, and it's
Right.
it's like it's not perfect today, but like we and when you're talking business strategies, I mean, normally these are several years out. This stuff is going to look very different several years out, and like no one's really like ready for that.
Hmm.
I th I am also kind of, as I've been reading through these things, countering it with what Rachel was telling us, where she was like, she kept saying, we're
Yeah.
very early. And I think that that's an important perspective too, but it's also like very early can mean like there's nowhere for it to go but kind of straight up, right? And
Right.
so it's like it's kind of crazy just to think about that. And that was more just like an interesting thing to talk through. I know it was a lot of information, and sorry if anybody got bored with it, but it's just it was because I think this theme of like how fast this stuff is moving keeps coming up, and that helped me kind of understand a little bit of what was happening behind the scenes on all of these different things.
What's the timeline on GTP4 or GPT4? I keep doing that. GPT4.
Um, I don't think it's been officially announced the last I saw. Yeah, so Google's top search result says the New York Times reported that GPT-4 is expected to be released in the first quarter of 2023. So imminently, right?
Soon. Yeah.
And I did see so about that like 175 billion versus the 1.5. There
Yeah.
is a reference in here about that I was reading about GPT-4 not really like it's not going to be as extreme of a difference. It's more about differences in capability rather than just the amount of data it's using. Because I think that we're now at this there's so much information in it. It's not really about the amount of information it has access to, right?
Yeah.
It's about its ability to use that efficiently, effectively, without bias, understand intent, all of the other things that are more about how you use the data. And so but that's not necessarily going to be as extreme of a jump, but it is going to be interesting to see what happens with that.
And hopefully accuracy is part of that too. I think that's the one of the most exciting things about this is if we get to the point where there's less uh, debate about black and white facts that we could just get an answer to. But I don't know. I don't know if that's dream world or not. GTP 17 or whatever.
GPT, not
Yeah.
GTP. It's PT.
Did I say GTP
It's
again?
all right. Yeah.
I'm even like consciously trying not to say
Yeah, I
GTP.
know. It's like it needs a better name. It's
Oh man,
impossible for people to consistently say correctly.
it's crazy.
And I have seen also in some of these articles, there's a OpenAI CEO. I think his name is, I know his last name's Altman. I think it's, yeah, Sam
Yeah, Sam
Altman.
Altman. Yeah.
He has been saying like there's a ton of rumor stuff out there, and a lot of the
Hmm.
things that you're going to see even from supposed like experts in different circles is just not correct in terms of like what's coming. um and it's he's just basically saying there's a ton of hype around it. So I think like that's the other thing to think about
Right.
is like everything's with going to be with a grain of salt, especially if you read something. And we run into this with Facebook ads world all the time. We'll hear people say, oh, I heard from someone at Facebook that some
Right.
feature is going away, and it's like until it's in writing we won't believe
Yeah.
it. So I think that that's kind of a similar mindset set here.
Last call.
I just had one more thing. I won't go too long.
Yeah.
um it's kind of along the timeline piece,
Yeah.
but I was just thinking about this like AI kind of going mainstream thing. And so another fun stat, and this is from Reuters. This talk about not knowing how to pronounce something. Reuters. Reuters, the
Dude,
Reuters. I should
your
know
guess
that,
is as
but
good as mine. I think I've always said rooters, but it could be wrong.
I'll ask ChatGPT how to pronounce it.
Yeah, exactly.
But so the actual website interface of ChatGPT, it was estimated to have reached 100 million monthly active users in January. So that was 2 months after it launched. And so that makes it officially the fastest growing consumer application in history. And
Wow.
this was a UBS study that they had quoted. What we haven't talked about here is Google's Bard. So they already have an established user base. So
Mhm.
SEMrush has a blog where they kind of track some of this. So Google's stats, and these are actually kind of old stats from, I think it was April 2021. It said 3.5 billion users in April 2021, unique on Google.
Hmm.
So you talk about that, and if AI becomes more commonplace in this Bard interface, again, Google has north of 90% search engine market share globally. There's nothing more mainstream than that. And that's
Right.
like that's just another concept of like, for I don't think we'll have necessarily a lot of naysayers or whatever listening to this, but if you haven't been convinced to pay attention to this stuff yet, I hope that at least convinces you to pay attention to this stuff. And I think John's going to keep covering this in future different forms, whether on his TikTok, his LinkedIn, his Facebook, his Instagram. Anything else? Twitter? Do you do anything?
No, I'm not on Twitter anymore.
All right.
Did you say LinkedIn and YouTube and
Oh, I forgot YouTube. Yeah.
obviously here
And your website. Don't forget that.
and the
And your email
website
list. Yeah. So,
and the email list
so
and the community. Yeah.
that's right.
Well, thanks so much for joining me again, Luke. Yeah, I think we'll probably have to make this a regular thing as long as AI and ChatGPT and Bard and everything else is a thing or are a thing, which I think is going to be a while. So thank you all for joining us. I mean, if you have any comments, any feedback, anything you want us to cover regarding this, maybe some cool use cases that you have with AI you want to share, drop us a line. Actually, the best place would probably be info@johnloomer.com because it could be Luke, it could be me that ends up getting that message. But otherwise, you can reach me anywhere. All right. Thanks again, everybody. Until next time, do awesome things.
I'm out.